Hi everyone, I'm David Fisher, and this is Presidential Chronicle, the series of books and videos on American history as seen through the lives of the presidents of the United States. This episode is from the life of Woodrow Wilson, and the focus is highs and lows at Princeton. The year is 1890, and Wilson is returning to his alma mater as the chair of jurisprudence and political economy at the College of New Jersey in Princeton, New Jersey. And this is where his career really took off. He continued to crank out papers and books, many of which were well received across the country. Division and Reunion, a biography of George Washington, and then the 5-volume History of the American People. Again, many of these books adopted as standards in other universities across the country. Wilson on campus, very popular. In fact, 4 times he was voted the most popular professor on campus. He had really honed his craft, that effective oratory that he had inherited from his father and worked on through his first part of his career, really coming to excellence here in his days as a professor at the College of New Jersey. But he worked himself to death. 1896, pain down his entire arm, numbness in his fingers, likely his first stroke. Doctors ordered rest, and for this, left the family at home, young girls too young to travel, took up a leisurely vacation in England and Scotland, back much better, well rested, a lot of exercise, feeling pretty good, and he was there for his true coming out. The 150th anniversary of the College of New Jersey was time for a name change, officially becoming Princeton University. And at the big celebration, Professor Woodrow Wilson was the keynote address. In this, he called it the Princeton in the Nation's Service. And in days quiet and troubled alike, Princeton has stood for the nation's service to produce men and patriots, Wilson said. Princeton is a place where ideals are kept in heart, in air they can breathe, but no fool's paradise. A place wherein to learn the truth about the past and hold debate about the affairs of the present with knowledge and without passion. A popular address for a popular professor on the Princeton campus. His stock was on the rise. He actually got a salary increase. They were able to finally build their first home, kind of a dream home. 3rd daughter arrived, daughter named Nell. Closest friend in the world for Wilson all these years was Professor Jack Hibben. Incredibly intimate relationship with Hibben, and very happy times in these years as a Princeton professor. But not that happy with the direction of the university, particularly with the president, Francis Patton. A lot of people were down on Patton. He had made a lot of big promises, but wasn't really delivering, and the trustees eventually decided basically to buy him out, have him move on. All 12 university presidents in the history of Princeton had been Presbyterian ministers, but not the 13th. After a dozen years on campus as a professor, the former College of New Jersey Princeton grad Woodrow Wilson was nominated and selected as the 13th president of Princeton. In fact, it was by acclamation. Proudest of all was Joseph Wilson, an elderly man, now Wilson's father and somewhat as an invalid, living with them. Boy, was he proud. He told his grandchildren, "Never forget what I tell you. Your father is the greatest man I have ever known. I know what I'm talking about. This is only the beginning of a great career." Joseph Wilson would die within a year of that moment, but certainly this was a highlight for him personally. Now, there were changes ahead for the university with Wilson now in charge. He made some innovations that were not only picked up at Princeton, but in many ways across the country for years ahead, beginning with curriculum. He believed the best way to go about things was having general subjects being taught to students in the first 2 years, and then they would essentially pick what we now call a major. And you'd have electives in that major, and that whole style of passing through your 4 years in college really originated with the ideas of Woodrow Wilson. His bigger innovation, perhaps, though, was how he used preceptors, tutors, integrally mixed into the curriculum and the teaching and instruction at Princeton. Here's how it would work. The professors would teach in large lectures, but at least once a week, these preceptors would sit with small groups of students where they would have real debate about what they're being taught. They would challenge each other, learn from each other, kind of real meaningful learning. And it was this combination of the lectures from professors and these small groups with the preceptors that Wilson thought was appropriate. In fact, he hired 50 preceptors, paid them well, turned them over every few years to keep them fresh. This is very much the system of higher academic learning. been adopted in the United States ever since, and really was the innovator, was Professor and now President of Princeton, Woodrow Wilson. 1906, he's in the job now about 4 years. He has another health scare. He lost the vision in his left eye, likely another stroke. This time the family is old enough to actually everyone headed off to Europe, another relaxing vacation, ready to come back for some real challenges ahead. The problem with Princeton, as Wilson saw it, was that it was elitist, and a lot of this was centered on their eating clubs. Now, Princeton had banned fraternities, so the real social gathering point on campus were these eating clubs. And in fact, almost all the social prestige of being a part of Princeton was emanated from these clubs. And Wilson didn't like it because it was undemocratic. It was your social status of your family, whether alums or parents. That's what really got you into these eating clubs. And that meant a lot of people who went to Princeton, frankly, never had a chance to matriculate into one of these social groups. And Wilson thought this was all wrong, undemocratic. It was this fight of democracy versus privilege. According to Wilson, my own ideals for the university are those of genuine democracy and serious scholarship. The two indeed seem to me to go together. Any organization which introduced elements of social exclusiveness constitutes the worst possible soil for serious intellectual endeavor, and that's what was going on at Princeton. His solution was his Quadrangle Plan. What he wanted to do was build these quadrangles that would have a dorm, eating hall, classrooms, and even unmarried faculty might reside within these quadrangles, where students of all classes, both classes at Princeton, freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, but also classes in American society, could mix together in a democratic fashion, learn from each other. This was what things were all about. The problem was that the trustees didn't really like this idea. They initially supported it, but then when the alums got involved, when the faculty got involved, they didn't want to get rid of those eating clubs. They had a lot vested in those. So on campus now, battle lines were drawn over this topic of the Quadrangle Plan. Now, Woodrow Wilson was a fighter, especially when principle was at stake, and so he decided to take his message on the road. And he told people that Princeton is exactly what they say of it, a fine country club where many of the alumni make snobs of their boys. He was laying it on the line because he had some powerful opposition. Andrew West, the dean of the graduate school, had joined up with former President of the United States Grover Cleveland, who had retired to the Princeton community and now was a member of the Board of Trustees. And even his close friend Jack Hibben, the professor, had been his close friend for more than a decade. All were on the other side of this Quadrangle Plan. They liked the eating clubs, so when the trustees finally took their vote in October of 1907, Woodrow Wilson lost on this plan. He lost his first major setback as Princeton president, and he lost his friend, Jack Hibben. Not because of Hibben, but because of Wilson. He felt that Hibben siding with the other side in this debate was a sense of disloyalty. Woodrow Wilson wasn't going to stand for that. Just like that, he cut Jack Hibben out of his life. Now, Wilson was distraught. He was physically a mess. So what did he do the next month? It was time for another vacation. He needed some rest because, once again, he was losing that feeling in his right arm and he needed to get away. Not to Europe this time. This time he went to Bermuda by himself, where he met a woman by the name of Mary Peck. Now, Miss Mary Peck was a cultured woman, married. Dignitaries would often come to Bermuda. They would end up in her home. She would invite them, and the president of Princeton University was certainly qualified for that. And Wilson and Peck bonded immediately. A very intimate connection. You can tell from their correspondence. The letters were actually uncomfortably affectionate. Just one example from Wilson to Peck. "You are the wonderful lady I knew the moment I looked into your beautiful eyes, and some of the best powers of my life I take from you. I found in my friend the loving power of a great woman, a fearless natural integrity, purity without prudery, rectitude and sincerity without convention, perfect wholesomeness and genuineness, as of a nature without morbidness." Mrs. Peck would respond to Wilson with letters such as, "You are an adorable person, and I count it the greatest honor and happiness and privilege of my life that you can call me friend. I miss you horribly, woefully." A lot of speculation about the relationship between Woodrow Wilson and Mary Peck. There is no evidence of a physical relationship. But did they cross the line, perhaps in an emotional or romantic sense, through this correspondence and their meetings together? Well, Ellen Wilson, Wilson's wife, kind of got in the middle of this at one point, where she pushed back in what she described to Wilson in a letter as not a physical love that he had for Mrs. Peck, but an emotional love. Well, Wilson denied this, and the letters would continue. The relationship would continue. He would see Mrs. Peck. She would come to visit occasionally. Even Ellen would become part of this relationship that would continue really into Wilson's presidency. It was a bit awkward at times, but not for Wilson and Peck. That level of intimate connection through their letters, not physical, maybe emotional, connection was certainly there, and that would continue actually for many, many years. Well, Wilson came back to the Princeton campus really to gear up for the biggest battle that he had, and this was over the graduate school. As we mentioned, Dean West was in charge of building that graduate school, and he and Wilson were at odds on where to put the school. For Wilson, again, this was again about the democratic principles. He wanted undergraduates and graduates together in close proximity so they could learn from each other. Dean West, that's not what he wanted for the graduate students. He wanted the complete opposite. He wanted their own space, maybe a mile or so away from campus, where they could focus on their studies and frankly not be bothered by the undergraduate noise happening in the other parts of campus. Well, once again, a battle is looming, and Princeton itself could not hold this debate, which went national. The big argument, democracy versus privilege, round 2. West, though, was stronger with the alums, and he got a bunch of large donations lined up that were stipulating that if Princeton wanted the money, then Dean West would choose where the graduate school would go. Well, Wilson was adamantly against this. He argued, look, donors don't decide university policy. The president of the university and the trustees decide. And once again, he's on the road and he's getting frustrated. In a speech in New Hampshire, this is April of 1910, so far as the colleges go, the sideshows have swallowed up the circus. And we don't know what's going on in the main tent, and I don't know that I want to continue as ringmaster under those conditions. He was actually thinking maybe this was going to be the end if he lost, and he lost this fight because the final straw came in from Isaac Wyman, a Princeton grad who died, a huge multi-million-dollar bequest. The executor of the estate was Dean West. He was the one who was going to decide how to spend that money, and with all that money rolling in, even Woodrow Wilson had to accept defeat. He told Ellen, we can beat the living, but we cannot fight the dead. Not looking very good now after a couple of major setbacks for the Princeton president. Could he survive these defeats? Well, he wasn't going to have to find out, because his real calling was about to come knocking at the door, but that's the story for another day. That is Woodrow Wilson and highs and lows at Princeton from the life of Woodrow Wilson. For more presidential chronicles, check out my books on Amazon.com, and don't forget to subscribe to my YouTube channel. Until next time, I'm David Fisher. This is Presidential Chronicles.